the times of truce, when the blowing winds cease, when the swelling seas settle down. When the earth enters a still point near dawn, near dusk, where the night skies grow silent with stars. Whenever the world of nature makes peace with itself, and man mirrors that peace in himself, gives free leave to his fellow man, these are the times when rare and graceful plumes of truce, deep spirits of unity, community, can be found and greatly felt by everything living. Be remembered and honored by everyone, young to old, hearkening. Welcome, and thank you for leaning in to this floating poetry broadcast, the 41st in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live by the wide open sea from Watch Hill, Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. And inviting you this week to reflect on the essence of our humanity, yours as a sentient being, and the one we have and share as a people, as one world of men, women, and children with the same essential human dimensions and right to dignity, beyond culture, language, color, geography, and how and where we can awaken to our deeper humanity, can understand it and live it, one and all, more clearly, more truly, more fully, and more respectfully. I've gathered a medley of elements for us on this theme, cultural commentary and poetry alike, that I hope further expands your awareness, raises consciousness, encourages empathy and compassion, inspires any kind of rising to our greaterness and helping others rise to theirs. As with every program, moving through all the curating that happens leading up to each one, I'm on a shared journey of discovery with you. Many things come to light that some of which I knew of, but many I hadn't, or in the choreography that we have them, or I bring them together. Our humanity, yours and ours alike, because at root, at heart, if not entirely engaged or expressed, whether dormant or active, the essence of humanity is present inside every single person on Earth, 8 billion individuals, or close enough. From Papua New Guinea to New York City, Rio to Cairo to Tokyo, India to Russia to Mongolia, Kenya, Australia. Well, I believe it's high time to call on and call forth all of our humanity, all the best qualities of our humanness, because we need them, especially when man's inhumanities to man is going on still in many places, sometimes in some cases epically, rampantly, and utterly tragically, when after centuries in our own modern times you'd think we'd be far wiser by now, far kinder, to and with each other and nature. So I thought we might, in some quiet moments, if we desire to, want to ask ourselves some questions, ones that could be helpful, could be insightful, and might include things like this. How much am I really in touch with my humanity? What examples resonate in my life to date? Am I coming from a truer humanity? Not an intellectual, disembodied one or a humanity light version, but one that's natural, that's whole, visceral, heartfelt, spiritful. How present or absent am I from having strong felt empathy, compassion, and sincere caring for the dignity and integrity of my fellow humans, ones I know, ones I don't know? Am I generously relating to my fellow beings across the world, being sensitive from afar to their equally human challenges and aspirations? How and where am I showing up day to day as a humane person, as a, quote, citizen humanitarian, good Samaritan in action, which isn't, to me, just for wealthy philanthropists and global crusaders, but something we each can be in our own circles, in our own way, in our local communities, carrying out acts of kindness, goodness, however small or large. And all of us who are, and I'm sure many of us do, let's keep going. Where am I opening to my higher consciousness, my better self? Where can I be more aware, attuned, wide awake to the heart and soul of the world around me? You may have other good ponderings, so those are some that might help get some of us started. It's always, to me, worth its weight in gold, in precious understanding, musing on the nature of our lives and the inner and outer quality of our days. So let's open out to various cultural thinkers, seekers, perceivers, and to chosen poems speaking to different dimensions of our humanity. Well, I thought we might just start with how it's defined in the larger way out there, and I went to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says humanity is a virtue associated with basic ethics of altruism derived from the human condition. It also symbolizes human love and compassion toward each other. Humanity differs from mere justice in that there is a level of altruism toward individuals included in humanity more so than the fairness found in justice. That is, humanity and the acts of love, altruism, and social intelligence are typically individual strengths, while fairness is generally expanded to all. It can be classified as one of the six virtues that are consistent across all cultures, and I was curious about some of the different understandings of it back in time. So in Confucian philosophy, Confucius said that humanity is a, quote, love of people. If you want to make a stand, help others make a stand. In Greek philosophy, Plato and Aristotle considered, quote, courage, justice, temperance, and generosity, wit, friendliness, truthfulness, magnificence, and greatness of soul to be the soul virtues. And Abrahamic religion, it was one of Thomas Aquinas' 7 heavenly virtues. But beyond that, humanity was so important in some positivist Christian cultures that it was to be capitalized like God, G-O-D. Kindness, altruism, and love are all mentioned in the Bible. Proverb 19:22 states that the desire of man is his kindness. And on the topic of altruism, emphasis is placed on helping strangers, hence the Good Samaritan. And I mentioned being a humanitarian in our own way. And that is defined as an active belief in the value of human life, whereby humans practice benevolent treatment and provide assistance to other humans in order to improve the conditions of humanity. So that's someone who has no prejudice with human suffering on grounds of gender, sexual orientation, religious or national divisions. The goal is simply to relieve suffering and maintain human dignity. So we can be those someones for sure. And dignity, how I'm not sure how you would define it, but here's a definition, is the right of a person to be valued and respected for their own sake and to be treated ethically. I came across a piece from Salon.com that for me goes in hand with these other virtues and qualities, which is empathy. And they mention Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which puts a person's mind front and center. Quote, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, endowed with reason and conscience, and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. The essence of dehumanization is therefore failing to recognize the fully human mind of another person. And those who fight against it typically deal with extreme cases that make it seem like a rare phenomenon, but it's not. They're saying here subtle versions are all over. And our sixth sense's shortcomings in these cases arise partly from our failure to engage it when in the presence of someone so different or distant from ourselves. It may feed off prejudice and hatred, but it does not require either. Disengagement can come anytime there's a distance between two minds that needs to be bridged. And there was a fascinating comment here about doctors whose business is to treat everyone humanely, can remain disengaged from the minds of their patients, particularly when those patients are easily seen as different from the doctors themselves. Well, wildly enough, until the early 1990s, it was routine practice for infants to undergo surgery without anesthesia. Why? Because at that time, up to that time, doctors did not believe that infants were able to experience pain, a fundamental capacity of the human mind. I couldn't get over that. So some of that brought up to me how sadly we, through history, have defined other groups that are not like, quote, us as lesser or inferior, as if we know better or have a superior way or culture or way of life, and impose it colonial or imperial style or just righteously. And so I wrote this poem toward that back in February, a few years ago. It's called The Noble Savage, and you've probably heard about that. And it starts with a quote from John Dryden from The Conquest of Granada. I am free as nature first made man, ere the base laws of servitude began, when wild in woods the noble savage ran. And here's the poem of mine. There's much to be said about being nobly sauvage, existing in a state of graceful innocence, natural wilderness, uncorrupted by, quote, civilization, by inhuman kind, and its own learned and practiced forms of savagery. One innately good, who lives, moves, and breathes freely from the deeper rules and finer rhythms of nature to an inborn spirit of virtue and valor, who's been glimpsed through the lens of literature from Enkidu to Parsifal, but can be found among us now in the flesh, seen or unseen, whose nobleness is a mark of true eminence, worth noting, of gentility, worth pondering. The Noble Savage. Some of you may know about Krista Tippett out in the world doing wonderful things, raising good consciousness, and her program On Being. And I came across this letter, or I'm going to read a little bit of it, that she wrote in last week's Pause, P-A-U-S-E, on her site, on their site. Dear friends, I've been thinking this week about vocation, from the Latin vocare, callings. Somewhere along the way in this culture, a person's vocation became synonymous with their job title, but I think of vocation as the full range of our callings as human beings. Yes, as professional people, but also as family members and neighbors, parents and friends and members of a body politic. Vocation is not so much about goals and accomplishments, it's about how we orient our lives and our attention and our passions. At different stages in life, different callings emerge and take primacy. What we focus on and pay homage to with our presence, and what we fight for from the ground of what we love. And some of us are called to be calmers of fear. This calling is so tender and so urgent. If what we truly want is to coax our own best selves and the best selves of others into the light Fear is the primitive, powerful place our brains go when they perceive threat. It collapses imagination, closing down a sense of the possible. It looks for a quote, other to blame, and it finds one. The anger that has consumed our life together on every side is fueled by pain and fear. This is an uncomfortable truth to take in, a fact not about life as we wish it to be, but about life as it is. One of the most painful things for me to watch in the frenzy of our life together in recent years was the loss of any capacity to remember that essential contradictions run wild in each of us and are real too in whoever our, quote, others have become. There's a terrible but also a beautiful and potentially redemptive complexity at play whenever human beings are involved. We spend so much time and energy in this culture, so much fierce creativity, wishing to change other people's minds. But in life, as it is lived, we know that's not how it works. Hearts soften, and then minds open. Pragmatic possibilities appear that our bodies and brains literally could not fathom before. I encourage you to read that beautiful letter. There's a lot more to it, but I'm sharing you some parts that spoke to me and to our theme and program tonight. Krista Tippett on being. Then this following that was something from Heart Math and Doc Childre, Awakening the Heart of Humanity. Although the pandemic and global protests have created unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety, an awakening of the heart has also taken place. More people are realizing we cannot return to the old normal. Rather, we need to co-create something new. There are many levels of awareness and perceptions throughout collective humanity. Our minds may be different based on beliefs, upbringing, and life situations, but our hearts can find harmony with each other in a shared existence if we desire this. I'm raising my hand. I'm desiring it. I hope many of you are. More and more people are inclined to believe it's highly possible we can create something new. Increasingly, much of humanity is feeling in their hearts that we need to start treating each other and our earth with more care, compassion, and respect. There are enough people awakening to prevent attitudes and perceptions from receding all the way back to where they were before the virus. It's our individual and collective responsibility to maintain this heart momentum and let it become our baseline for creating and thriving in a world of increased peace, joy, and fulfillment. Love can create such things, yet we have to choose it. Let's each commit to a practice of replacing standard reactions of judgment, blame, and separation with compassion, kindness, and cooperation for the good of the whole and our own peace. Managing our mental and emotional energies, moving with foresight, and putting out more compassion and kindness at this time will help to continue the activation of increased heart energy throughout humanity. I found this piece from dailygood.org. Very nice site. Here's a slice of what I read apropos of where we are. You might rightly observe that we no longer live in small insular societies where generosity and mutual esteem structure our relations, but we could. It is within our power to create such webs of interdependence quite outside the market economy. Intentional communities of mutual self-reliance and reciprocity are the wave of the future, and their currency is sharing. The move toward a local food economy is not just about freshness and food miles and carbon footprints and soil, organic matter. It is all of those things, but it's also about the deeply human desire for connection, to be in reciprocity with the gifts that are given you. The real human needs that such arrangements address are exactly what we long for, yet cannot ever purchase: being valued for your own unique gifts, earning the regard of your neighbors for the quality of your character, not the quantity of your possessions, what you give, not what you have. Well, that opening piece, that poem that was scored to original music by a wonderful composer I've mentioned in the past, done other things with him, Jacob Friedman, was for the 2018 Winter Olympics, and I felt it was so fitting to begin with because it speaks to so many dimensions of our humanity and being at truce with each other as part of that, at peace with each other. So at that same event, I was a cultural contributor to it in a much larger way, and I composed a whole poetorial, which is one of the things I do. One of the hats I wear is a poetorialist, and of written, spoken, visual, and some musically scored poetry. And this next was a piece for all the peoples of Korea, of the Koreas, that was dedicated to them at the Olympics in Pyeongchang in South Korea. It's called Norths and Souths. Throughout history, countries and kingdoms, dynasties and dominions, from the Americas to Asia, Europe to Britannia, have lost their civility, descended sadly into hostilities. Throughout life, then and now, men and women have too at times left their inner poles, their true norths and souths, lost that precious harmony, entered blindly into inhumanities. As Mr. Lincoln sagely said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Rightly so, from houses of nations and cultures to houses of communities and self, yours and mine, or stand well or worthily, until they hold themselves, until we hold ourselves close to the deeper heartfulness of mankind, our human kindness, and the benevolent geography of nature. Well, brain pickings is a source I go to often when I'm researching numbers of things, including our programs. And I came across the British philosopher from the 50s and 60s, Alan Watts, on breaking free from your ego. Well, he had begun, if you don't know about him, popularizing Eastern philosophy in the West and offering a very different perspective on inner wholeness in the age of anxiety and what it really means to live a life of purpose. And one of the books he has is called The Book, and On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are is the rest of the title. And he argued with great conviction and compassion that the, quote, prevalent sensation of oneself as a separate ego enclosed in a bag of skin is a hallucination which accords neither with Western science nor with the experimental philosophy religions of the East. At the heart of the human condition, he argues, is a core illusion that fuels our deep-seated sense of loneliness the more we subscribe to the myth of the soul ego, one reflected in the most basic language we use to make sense of the world. He says we suffer from a hallucination, from a false and distorted sensation of our own existence as living organisms. Most of us have the sensation that, quote, I myself is a separate center of feeling and action living inside and bounded by the physical body, a center which, quote, confronts a, quote, external world of people and things, making contact through the senses with a universe both alien and strange. Everyday figures of speech reflect it. Quote, I came into this world, quote, you must face reality, quote, the conquest of nature. Well, this feeling of being lonely, he says, and very temporary visitors in the universe is in flat contradiction to everything known about man and all other living organisms in the sciences. We do not, quote, come into this world, we come out of it, as leaves from a tree, as the ocean waves, the universe peoples. Every individual is an expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action of the total universe. This fact is rarely, if ever, experienced by most individuals. Even those who know it to be true in theory do not sense or feel it, but continue to be aware of themselves as isolated, quote, egos inside bags of skin. So talking about connectedness to nature, the natural world that we need to be as humane to as each other, I would say, the naturally sacred world. Rob Bresney's weekly newsletter had this piece about an environmental activist who in the late 1990s, he says, Julia Butterfly Hill spent 2 years living in a redwood tree she named Luna. I don't know if I vaguely remember this, but now I know more about it. You might have heard about it too. Her goal was to save it from being cut down by a logging company. She succeeded both literally and mythically. Luna was spared from death, as was a surrounding 3-acre swath of trees. She became an inspiring symbol of artful, compassionate protest. Later, she told Benjamin Tong in the DVD, The Taoist and the Activist, quote, so often activism is based on what we are against, what we don't like, what we don't want, and yet we manifest what we focus on, and so we are manifesting yet ever more of what we don't want, what we don't like, what we want to change. So for me, she said, activism is about a spiritual practice as a way of life. And I realized I didn't climb the tree because I was angry at the corporations and the government. I climbed the tree because when I fell in love with the redwoods, I fell in love with the world. So it is my feeling of connection that drives me instead of my anger and feelings of being disconnected. How about that? That led me to find Mary Oliver's poem, our praise poet Mary Oliver, speaking too of trees. When I am among the trees is this piece, this poem. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I'm so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Thank you, Mary Oliver. Well, we know that we're fellow humans, but we're not only fellow humans, but fellow earthlings, sharing one planet, one support system, one natural world. And I composed this for that in 2016 in Nomad in New York City, that section, north of Madison. It's called Earthman. Earthman, planetarian, worldling, human kindler, Homeric sapien, you, we, solar beings, seeking, drinking, reflecting light. I brought up Wendell Berry, the poet, farmer, and naturalist, who's up there and way up there in years and still going strong, beautifully strong. And he asks us to ask critical questions too. He calls us to, rightfully I'd say, to some account of a hard look at least at what we're willing to do in the world or feel in the world. And this is a poem he calls Questionnaire, Wendell Berry. And it's numbered 1 to 5. 1. How much poison are you willing to eat for the success of the free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poisons. Number 2, for the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the following blanks with the names of your favorite evils and acts of hatred. 3, what sacrifices are you prepared to make for culture and civilization? Please list the monuments, shrines, and works of art you would most willingly destroy. 4, in the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of our beloved land are you willing to desecrate? List in the following spaces the mountains, rivers, towns, farms you could most readily do without. 5. State briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Name, please, the children whom you would be willing to kill. Wow, that's intense. But some of being human and full of humanity is intense. And he asked those. Well, I couldn't go there with you, but at least I'm sharing what he's able to do. That's very courageous. There are obviously, as I've often brought in and referenced, the vital role artists, poets, writers, painters, all kinds of artists play in our humanity and becoming more human or more humane. And I have just a few here with some thoughts that each of them have. Iris Murdoch, back in time, said, there's no doubt which art is the most practically important for our survival and salvation. That's literature. Words constitute the ultimate texture and stuff of our moral being, since they are the most refined and delicate and detailed, as well as the most universally used and understood of the symbolisms whereby we express ourselves into existence. We became spiritual animals when we became verbal animals. The fundamental distinctions can only be made in words. Words are spirit. There are not two cultures. There's only one culture, and words are its basis, are where we live as human beings and as moral and spiritual agents. James Baldwin, back in 1962, said, it seems to me that the artist's struggle for his integrity must be considered as a kind of metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily of all human beings on the face of this globe to get to become human beings. It's not your fault, it's not mine, that I write, and I never would come before you in the position of a complainant for doing something that I must do. The poets, by which I mean all artists, are finally the only people who know the truth about us. Soldiers don't, statesmen don't, priests don't, union leaders don't. Only poets. He also said most people live in almost total darkness. People, millions of people, whom you will never meet, never see, who don't know you, never will know you, people who may even try to kill you in the morning, live in a darkness which, if you have that funny, terrible thing which every artist can recognize and no artist can define, you are responsible to those people all to lighten. And then Toni Morrison, the last of my trio of people, of writers, in her award acceptance speech at Vanderbilt University in 2013, said, I'm a writer and my faith in the world of art is intense but not irrational or naive. Art invites to take the journey beyond price, beyond costs, into bearing witness to the world as it is and as it should be. It invites us to know beauty and to solicit from it even the most tragic of circumstances, reminds us that we belong here, and if we serve, we last. My faith in art rivals my admiration for any other discourse. Its conversation with the public and among its various genres is critical to the understanding of what it means to care deeply and to be human completely. And with an eye to the brokenness of the world, past and present, she also said, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it's important not to ignore its pain, it's also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. All right, some poems. William Stafford has an apropos poem for us. Humanities lecture. He wrote this in 1977, I believe. Aristotle was a little man with eyes like a lizard, and he found a streak down the midst of things, a smooth place for his feet, much more important than the carved handles on the coffins of the great. He said you should put your hand out at the time and place of need. Strength matters little, he said, nor even speed. His pupil, a king's son, died at an early age. That Aristotle spoke of him, it is impossible to find. The youth was notorious, a conqueror, a kid with a gang. But even this Aristotle didn't ever say. Around the farthest forest and along all the bed of the sea, Aristotle studied immediate local ways, many of which were wrong, so he studied poetry. There, in pity and fear, he found man. Many thinkers today who stand low and grin have little use for anger or power or its palace or its prison, but quite a bit for that little man with eyes like a lizard. William Stafford. Carl Sandburg, back in 1936, on President Abraham Lincoln, Here's his poem called From the People, Yes. Lincoln? He was a mystery in smoke and flags, saying yes to the smoke, yes to the flags, yes to the paradoxes of democracy, yes to the hopes of government, of the people, by the people, for the people, no to debauchery of the public mind, no to personal malice nursed and fed, yes to the Constitution when a help, no to the Constitution when a hindrance, yes to man as a struggler amid illusions, each man fated to answer for himself. Which of the faiths and illusions of mankind must I choose from my own sustaining light to bring me beyond the present wilderness? Lincoln, was he a poet? And did he write verses? I have not willingly planted a thorn in any man's bosom. I shall do nothing through malice. What I deal with is too vast for malice. Death was in the air. So was birth. The back-in-time poet Rumi instructed us to pretend the universe is rigged in our favor. Gandhi said, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love is always won. Yes, there have been murderers and tyrants, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Think of it. Always. The American Buddhist author and teacher, Jack Kornfield, he said, while the news often features the worst of humanity, there are a billion acts of human kindness every hour of every day. Take another breath and sense this truth. Thank you, Jack Kornfield. Well, I don't happen to believe in Darwinism, or at least how it was misused, derailed by Western societies, and hasn't served us as far as I'm concerned, but I have a different approach. You may have something similar in other words that's truly human, that nurtures our humanity versus denaturing it. And I call this poem Survival of the Kindest, Survival of the Kindest, is my mantra, my modus operandi. Not survival tooth and claw of the fittest, in a world where the supply of kindness is abundant, the need urgent, yet the demand for prowess more prized, expedient. I'll keep kindness, compassion, generosity, humanity as my king, as the jewels in life's crown. As I was putting this all together, I was thinking of deeply human people I know in my life, past and present, and I'm sure to come. I invite them always. Friends, mentors, colleagues, others. And you surely have your own shining examples, your own beacons of humanity who may be small giants or very large giants in the world. And this was for one of them, among others. And this is for Roger Wu, who I call Master Wu because I find he's quite a master in his own way. And this is called The Heart of the Master. Is the heart of the world. It beats for all humanity, for all possibility, for all earthly and ascended masters, ascending apprentices. Its chambers hold the wonders of a life evolvingly and exuberantly lived. Its vessels flow with wisdom and vitality like wild and ancient rivers through the landscape of the body. To all deep listeners, its valves sound forth strongly like ocean waves rolling ashore, distinctly like the calls of an owl filling the silence of the woods. A heart the Master lives from, humbly, ever grateful for the gifts of his mastery. May be helpful to bring this in a small lick, which is about the fact that we are perfectly imperfect, and just to accept that. And I came across someone who commented on it from heysigmund.com. There are the vulnerabilities that exist at our edges with a realness and a rawness that can feel overwhelming at times. It is easy to feel as though we're the only ones who wade in the messiness of them all, but we're not. We never are. We might do them at different intensities and with different impacts and levels of awareness, but we all do them. It is the beautifully imperfect art of being perfectly human. I connected that dot to the writer William Styron, who wrote his daughter a letter in 1972 and said, "As for your existential wrestling, I'm sure that I don't have to tell you that your pondering and wondering and troubling are only extensions of what people have been doing ever since they had the capability of thought, which is to say hundreds of thousands of years. Gods and the idea of a god were, of course, born out of just this troubled pondering, so it may or may not be a consolation to you that your intense wonder and turmoil about the meaning of the human condition is, in fact, a part of the human condition, or at least as it is experienced by sensitive and questing souls like yourself. It may just be that there's no reason or purpose to existence. Many great men, thinkers, and artists have thought this to be true, yet have not despaired over this assumption, but have created great work through their very vision of mankind enduring, triumphant over the sheer purposelessness of the universe, and in spite of the bleak and soulless aspect it so often presents. The whole concept of tragedy is, of course, embodied in this notion." William Styron. Well, Erich Fromm, F-R-O-M-M, is a marvelous humanistic philosopher and psychologist from the past, not too far in the past, but in the past. And one of his many books, this is from the Sane Society, S-A-N-E. I thought this was worth sharing a slip of. He says, "If I can say, quote, I love you, I say I love in you all of humanity, all that is alive. I love in you also myself. Self-love in this sense is the opposite of selfishness. The latter is actually a greedy concern with oneself, which springs from and compensates for the lack of genuine love for oneself. Love, paradoxically, makes me more independent because it makes me stronger and happier, yet it makes me one with the loved person to the extent that individuality seems to be extinguished for the moment. In loving, I experience I am you. You, the loved person. You, the stranger. You, everything alive. In the experience of love lies the only answer to being human, lies sanity." And he says, "Productive love always implies a syndrome of attitudes that of care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. If I love, I care. That is, I'm actively concerned with the other person's growth and happiness. I'm not a spectator. I am responsible, that is. I respond to his or her needs, to those they can express, and more so to those they cannot or do not express. I respect them, that is, according to the original meaning of res spicere, and I look at them as they are objectively and not distorted by my wishes and fears. I know them. I have penetrated through their surface to the core of their being and related myself to them from my core, from the center, as against the periphery of my being." That was marvelous. What about the generous humanity of our mothers who brought us here literally to life or otherwise mothered us into our lives? Well, this was an honoring of them and their humanity that I wrote one Mother's Day for all mothers out there in the world, past, present, and to come. Dear mothers, thank you, because we could never have done any of this without you, could never have set foot on earth to begin with, let alone landed in the warm and welcoming lap of this life, our life, or been able to touch, see, and feel it, learn from it, wonder about, even sing about it, be filled, surprised, and often thrilled by it all. Without you, dear mothers, we would not have had a leaping off point of a tender and surrendering kind for love, for cherishing ourselves and others as freely, as innocently as you naturally have, for being any kind of caring friends, partners, dreamers, lovers, or now or later appreciators of what it takes to bring a being to the world, a child of pure possibility into the world. How much giving, daily nurturing, oceans of hoping and believing. So for myself, and if I may, countless men, women, and children everywhere, to each and all of you mothers, thank you dearly, forever. right, we're coming into the last stretch for now. So we have a handful of more things for me to bring to you. Billy Collins, poet Billy Collins, former poet laureate. The parade. How exhilarating it was to march along the great boulevards in the sun flash of trumpets and under all the waving flags, the flag of ambition, the flag of love. So many of us streaming along, all of humanity really, moving in perfect step, yet each lost in the room of a private dream. How stimulating the scenery of the world, the rows of roadside trees, the huge curtain of the sky. How endless it seemed until we veered off the broad turnpike into a pasture of high grass, headed toward the dizzying cliffs of mortality. Generation after generation, we kept shouldering forward until we step off. We keep shouldering forward until we step off the lip into space. And I should not have to remind you that little time is given here to rest on a wayside bench, to stop and bend to the wildflowers, or to study a bird on a branch. Not when the young are always shoving from behind, not when the old keep tugging us forward. Billy Collins. Well, the historian, philosopher, and thinker Howard Zinn, Zinn, he said on hope, to be hopeful in hard times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Well, I invite us, encourage us, hope for us each and all to arise to greater places of humanity and equanimity and hopefulness within ourselves, with each other, through whatever the ashes of conflict may be, personal or public, the clashes of views and beliefs we, as individuals and as a world, are being consumed by daily, to remember we have wings, great wings, to open out, to fly with, toward our higher, larger selves and possibilities. I want to point us to our farther-reaching inner light, hence the choice of the image for this broadcast of the lighthouse and this poem, being of light, being of light. Be a man, a woman, a child of light, a bearer of light, a kindler and keeper of light, that beacons in all directions, sweeps over dark seas, stony shores, the faces of vessels, of sailors, of known and unknown voyagers. I also ask us if we can feel even more for all living creatures, as poet Ellen Bass, B-A-S-S, resounds in her poem here. The big picture. I try to look at the big picture. The sun, ardent tongue licking us like a mother besotted with her new cub, will wear itself out. Everything is transitory. Think of the meteor that annihilated the dinosaurs, and before that the volcanoes of the Permian period, all those burnt ferns and reptiles, sharks and bony fish. That was extinction on a scale that makes our losses look like a bad day at the slots. And perhaps we're slated to ascend to some kind of intelligence that doesn't need bodies or clean water or even air. But I can't shake my longing for the last 600 Iberian lynx with their tufted ears, Brazilian guitarfish, the 4% of them still cruising the seafloor, eyes staring straight up, and all the newborn marsupials, red kangaroos, joeys the size of honeybees, steelhead trout, river dolphins, all we can save, so many species of frogs breathing through their damp, permeable membranes. Today on the bus, a woman in a sweater the exact shade of cardinals and her cardinal-colored bra strap exposed on her pale shoulder, makes me ache for those bright flashes in the snow, and polar bears, the cream and amber of their fur, the long hollow hairs through which sun slips, swallowed into their dark skin. When I get home, my son has a headache, and though he's almost grown, asks me to sing him a song. We lie together on the lumpy couch, and I warble out the old show tunes, night and day. They can't take that away from me. A cheap silver chain shimmers across his throat, rising and falling with his pulse. There never was anything else, only these excruciatingly insignificant creatures we love. Each day, for me, is an opportunity to choose goodness. And next to the end here is this piece: in with the good air, in with the good air, with the good earth, with the good self, with this remarkably good life, this gift of being alive, of being awake to the world around and inside, to all the goodness and lightness of this world, despite its sadness, darkness, to all the possibilities for living each day in states of greaterness, in states of gratefulness. So now next to last is Dante and the Divine Comedy, the Commedia, which actually did not really mean comedy of any kind, but drama. So the divine drama of life really is what it's all about. And the opening lines that you might know, it begins, all of the stories begin here, and our story in its own way at the moment maybe begins here. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself astray in a dark wood where the straight road had been lost. Well, if you know the Divine Comedy and the Inferno and so on, Dante was attempting to address the big questions associated with being. What is evil? What is human nature? What is redemption, goodness, sanctity? Well, even though it's all about, it's a 14,000 line epic that was written in 1321 on the state of the soul after death, but we can find our way now while we're alive and divinely alive in the divine drama we're living on earth, and with love and with the rest of our own best humanity. So it ends this way. Ci volgeva il mio discio alle velle, siccome rota che ugualmente è mossa, l'amor che muove il sole e l'altre stelle. Now my will and my desire were turned, like a wheel in perfect motion, by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. So, let us end with a poem that I composed specifically for this broadcast for us, a call. Our humanity. What we belong to. What we can point to out there around us. And what a singular gift. Our innate sentience, deeper humanness, shared with 8 billion other souls and bodies. What we can rise to in here, if and when we choose to or are moved to. Summon the truer and fuller humanity that, whether clearly or obscurely, resides so surely within each of us. Whether it's eager or reticent, lost or longed for, sleeping or awakening. I remember ceremonies that began in the dark of a church or a country field, a first candle being lit from a source, and from that first lighting to the other held by the person beside. Then each holder in turn letting their flame light the next and next, until all were aglow, until we soon cascadingly formed one immense body of light, a bonfire of human-kindled kind, reflecting spirits, reflected in eyes, beaconing a remembering out, sending a hope-filled illumination out into the unseen and unknown, the same way the flame of your humanity and mine, instead of flickering alone, can be lit, fed, combined, and enlarged, and join the wicks, the rising spirits of all those who, from where we stand, we cannot see or know, but can feel in the center of our chests, enough to create a great forest, a great sea family of uniting, igniting humanity, a shared light rise, the greatest that people of any time in history or memory have ever known. A conscious joining, generous emanating of human light, benevolent light that brings wanted, beyond needed solace, strength, and wordless togetherness forth, to soothe the heart and smooth the future of the trembling world. Thank you again for generously listening in, for thinking and feeling in this week, and to those among you who listen often so faithfully. Special thanks, too, to all of you donating to support these weekly programs and my mission to uplift spirits and nourish spirits through my poetic arts. You help keep it all going. Contributions can be made in any amount by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site. Likewise, patrons inviting me their way for a month or season ahead this year as a poet in residence to create and dedicate inspiring new work. I also welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions. Email Colin at thepoetorialist.com. Replays of all my programs are on my YouTube channel to be reheard and shared freely. Meanwhile, I invite you to lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to embodying and embracing and expressing your humanity and ours, and as always, good spirits.